Paul Abernathy, and I'm the founder of Master The NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code. Today's episode is part 4 of a 7-part series where we talk about hot tubs and spas, and the whole series talks about Article 680, dealing with swimming pools, hot tubs, spas, hydromassage therapy pools, tubs, hydromassage bathtubs, and what have you. And it's a 7-part series, and we've come to part 4, and we're dealing with hot tubs and spas. So what we want to do is try to cover all of the things that you need to know about spas and hot tubs. We're going to try to do that within an hour, and we're going to get into a lot of the details. Again, my name is Paul Abernathy, and I'm a member of Code Making Panel 17 for the National Electrical Code. That's NPA 70. And I also sit on Code Making Panel 5 as well, which is, deals with 250 and what have you, grounding and bonding. Okay, so I sit in those aspects. So there's a lot of grounding aspects that are in 680 that I kind of understand, and then this 680 does its own little thing. So we have to understand a hierarchy of code. Now, before I even get into that, let me remind you of something. You need to go back and watch Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1 was your general requirements, Part 2 is permanently installed pools, and Part 3 is storable pools. And you need to watch those if those are what you're needing to deal with. If you're only dealing with hot tubs and spas, then you can come right here into Part 4. But you have to remember there's going to be certain aspects within Part 4 that's going to send you and tell you, hey, you've got to be aware that Part 2 does apply. Okay, so most notably when we're dealing with issues with the spas and the outdoor and indoor applications, you're going to have some requirements that you're going to have to be met. So it's not just about Part 4. Okay, you always meet Part 1. You meet the part that you're in, which in this case is Part 4, and then it's going to make reference in certain applications for you to meet Part 1 and Part 2. And there's certain areas that are specific, like you have Part 4, which is dealing in its general use for Part 4, but then when you get into those nuances of 680.42 and 43, those aspects of that specific section are going to reference you to Part 2. So you got to kind of understand that type of thing. So you need to know that in the code, chapters 1 through 4 apply generally throughout the code, and then 5, 6, and 7 can augment, change, modify chapters 1 through 4, as well as their own 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so that's kind of how they work. So with that said, we'll get into it, and we'll talk about the spas and hot tubs. Now, in order to make sure that you get the understanding of the definition, we're going to hope you understand what a hot tub or spa is. And in doing so, you want to go back and look at Part 1, where we go into detailed definitions that are found in 680.2. So you want to make sure you do that. So go back and watch the Part 1 episode. We're going to assume that you have, and we're going to move into Part 4 in order to be able to get started into the discussion. All right, so this is Part 4, dealing with spas and hot tubs. We're going to talk about the general requirements, emergency switches for spas and hot tubs, most notably for commercial applications, not for single-family dwellings. Outdoor installations, indoor installations, and the protection, and that's the GFCI protection that we're going to be providing them. Obviously, we always want to remind you that the general rules in Part 1 are going to apply, and Part 4 is going to apply to all of this scope. Now you're going to see that when you get into here, outdoors and indoor installations of these spas and hot tubs, that it's also going to require you to meet the requirements of Part 2. And of course, it's going to change some of the requirements. For example, the equipotential bonding. If you meet certain requirements, it's going to say, well, you don't have to do that if you meet these requirements. And if you don't meet these requirements, guess what? I did tell you got to meet Part 2, so then you're going to have to meet the equipotential bonding requirements. So it's important to understand it. So we'll really discuss that when we get into 42 and 43 of 680 here. Okay, we will talk about that in more detail. So this right here is a factory assembled type of above ground spa hot tub. This actually is referred to as a hot tub. The ones that go into the ground that are next to pools, for example, those tend to be used as spas. Are called spas, but they're generally the same requirements here. This one just happens to be listed for indoor and outdoor use, which you'll see it's pretty important later. But it has a number of jets, and under here it's probably got the pumps and the sanitation generator and heater and all that type of thing located. And some of them, the one I even had a little stereo here that you can play the music through the water and what have you. This one right here is typically referred to as a spa. Okay. All right, 680.41 emergency switch. So when we're not dealing with a single family dwelling here, we're dealing with all other applications where you might have this spa location. All right, and so what we're dealing with is a clearly labeled emergency shutoff or control switch for the purposes of shutting the motors that provide power to this recirculation system and jet system. Shall be installed at a point readily accessible to the user and not less than 5 feet away, adjacent to and within sight of the spa or hot tub. Okay, so this applies to spa or hot tub. Again, doesn't apply to a single family unit. It's going to have a maintenance disconnect, which is required by 680.12, but that's not what we're talking about. This is an emergency shutoff, and this is an example over here where they're doing the labeling. Here's the mushroom style shutoff and all that located right here. Okay. Now we're dealing with the outdoor installations, so we jump right into 680.42. And we're dealing with 680. Now let's read I'm going to read you the requirements for 680.42 because we are dealing with an outdoor installation. So this is dealing with some applications which allow for flexible connections and for flexible conduits and cord and plug connections for these outdoor spas or hot tubs. But I need to read you the scope here of .42 kinda. We call it a scope. It's not the scope itself, but it kind of gives you the direction that you need to follow with these outdoor installations. It says, a spa or hot tub installed outdoors shall comply. Now that's a mandatory rule here, shall comply with the provisions of Part 1 and Part 2 of this article. Okay, so we have to meet the requirements in general for Part 2, which is our permanently installed pools. Okay, and it says, except as permitted in 680.42a and b, and we're going to look at each one of those here. So you got to meet all the requirements of Part 2, you got to meet all the requirements of Part 1, and of course you got to meet all the requirements of Part 4, which is for spas and hot tubs. And then it goes on to say, well, for these two applications, don't worry about the issues that are required in Part 2. You can use what we're putting right here. It's permissible to do this. Okay, and here's what we're looking at. A has to deal with flexible connections. And here are the two flexible connections that we're talking about right here on the screen. Okay? So I can actually, if it's an outdoor spa or hot tub, I can use a flexible conduit. And it can be liquid-tight flexible metallic conduit, which is an LFMC, or liquid-tight flexible non-metallic conduit, which is an LFNC. Most notably, this would probably be LFNC-B because you don't have the same length restrictions on that LFNC as you would on the type A or C. But the B type tends to give you a little more allowances. So when I say that, it's permitted to use them on these outdoor spas and hot tubs in lieu of the requirements that would be in Part 2. However, you got to make sure that you do follow the rules for each one of these articles, okay, that are associated here. You have to make sure that you follow those. Now, another method would be cord and plug connection. So a lot of these units already come with a cord and plug connection, all right? And most notably, the 30 amp ones that are 15 and 125 volt type of plug with a maximum of 30 amp connection on them. A lot of them you buy that you can get it as 20 amp with a cord and plug, and it's integral to the cord and plug. So here it is, cord and plug connections with a cord not longer than 15 feet, so you've got a limited length on the cord, shall be permitted or protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter. Okay? All right, so we have established that we do have the ability to have some flexible connections, not just the rigid type of connections that we would see in Part 2. Okay? Now, let's talk about bonding. Now, here's where a lot of the confusion starts. There was a TIA that was given to the 2011 code, which 2011 code generally said that you're going to meet the requirements of 680.26 for the general rule, but then it said, there's some components on here, like the metal bands or the hoops or wooden staves of some kind of uniquely designed hot tubs or spas. But you don't have to bond those small bands. It would be impractical to do so. But it didn't give you any allowance to say, well, I can throw out the whole requirements of Part 2, which is 680.26 for the perimeter surface requirement. Well, that TIA into 2011 said, wait a minute, okay, you don't have to do it, and you don't have to have that perimeter surface if you meet these requirements. Well, because it was a TIA into 2011, they carried it over into the 2014 code automatically. So it went from the TIA straight into the 2014 National Electrical Code. So what you see here on the screen is the language that's in the 2011, and then you see all of the language that incorporates the TIA that was issued, so that all of this is what you're going to see in the 2014 edition. Okay? So let's read it so we understand it. Bonding by metal-to-metal mounting on a common frame, okay, which can meet that bonding requirement, or base shall be permitted. Okay? The metal bands or hoops used to secure wooden staves shall not be required to be bonded as required in 680.26. Okay? All right. That only applied to the bands. That was one of the issues, and it caused a lot of confusion where people were saying, nope, you've got to have that perimeter surface, even if it's a factory type of spa or hot tub, then you'd have this issue. So they came along and had this TIA that said, no, it's not really necessary, and let's give you some more detail. And again, it was carried over into 2014. And let's read it. Now it says, equipotential bonding of the perimeter surface in accordance with 680.26b2. If you remember, that's the requirement under Part 2 for that equipotential bonding grid. One of the components was that perimeter bonding. Shall not be required to be done provided for spas and hot tubs where all of the following conditions are met. Notice it says all. So I'm going to read you all four of these things. So if you have a spa or hot tub that complies with all these things right here, then you do not have to meet the perimeter requirements in 680.26b2. And remember, all of Part 4 dealing with this outdoor spa, like we're talking about now, still has to comply with Part 1 and Part 2, except, like it said earlier, where it meets 680.42a and b. Okay? And now we're dealing with the B component. Okay? If you meet all these things, then you don't have to follow the requirements of Part 2 when it comes to this aspect of it, the bonding. All right, let's go on and read it. Number 1. Now, if your spa or hot tub is listed as a self-contained spa for above ground use, you got to make sure that's the case. And that picture we saw earlier is an above ground spa. All right, that was above ground hot tub. Okay, so that one's good. Check. Next, 2, it says the spa or hot tub shall not be identified as suitable only for indoor use. Okay, so if it says suitable only for indoor use, then you can't use it outside. Kind of kills this anyway. Okay, so you got to make sure that it's okay for use outdoors as well. 3, the installation shall be in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Again, remember that the manufacturer's instructions are part of a listing. And it shall be located on or above grade. Okay, so this hot tub or spa has to be on grade or above grade. Okay, like up on a deck or something like that, or on a patio on grade. Okay, it can't be in the ground. All right, it's got to be on or above grade. And then lastly, number 4, which tends to throw a lot of people off, and I wish I had a graphic for it, and I do not, so I will try my best to paint you a visual picture here. It says the top rim of the spa or hot tub shall be at least 28 inches above all the perimeter surfaces that are within 30 inches. So you go out 30 inches in all directions from this top of the spa or hot tub, and you have to make sure that it is at least 28 inches from that perimeter surface up to the top of the spa or hot tub. It has to be at least 28 inches up. So this kind of is like a little donut, if you will, that goes around the perimeter of the spa or hot tub. And you have to maintain that 28 inches to the top all the way around up to 30 inches around. Okay? So that has to be maintained. And just so you know, steps for entry or exit of the self-contained spa can't reduce or increase this rim height. So, you know, you have to maintain that 28-30. Those are the clearances we're looking for. 30 inches out and then 28 inches up to the actual spa or hot tub's rim. Okay, you have to maintain that in order for this rule to apply and for you not to have to put that equipotential grid around it. Now, if you don't meet this and you do put it outside, then, and let's assume that it can go outside and you're not violating the listing of the actual factory unit. If you install it outside above grade, then you're going to have that perimeter. Okay. If a spa or hot tub's installed in the ground outside and it's the type that's listed for that, then you're going to have the requirements of Part 2 to be met. Okay. This is only allowing you not have to meet those unique requirements in 680.26 of Part 2. That's what this is here. It's giving you that ability to forego that. Okay. Now, what about if I'm running wiring from the inside of a building, from a dwelling unit out to a spa or hot tub? What kind of wiring methods can I use here? Well, it says, look, in the interior of a dwelling unit or in the interior of another building or structure that is associated with that dwelling unit, any of the wiring methods that are recognized or permitted in Chapter 3 of this code that contain a copper equipment grounding conductor that is insulated or enclosed within an outer sheathing of a wiring method and not smaller than a 12 shall be permitted for use for the connection of the motor, the heater, and the control loads that are part of the self-contained spa or hot tub or packaged spa or hot tub assembly. So paraphrasing this, it means that I can use a non-metallic sheath cable because it is enclosed in an outer sheathing. I could use a type SE if I wanted, provided I get that of the copper type. Or I could actually use raceways that are in Chapter 3, and I could use an insulated equipment grounding conductor. Okay, so I've got some options here, all right, keeping you in mind. Now, last thing we want to talk about, and again, this is for the indoor going to the outdoor installation. Now, keeping that in mind, you want to be really careful because, again, even though this might say that I can use something like a non-metallic sheath cable, this is for the interior portion. When you start going outside, we all know that non-metallic sheath cable in accordance with 334 is not going to permit you to be able to use a non-metallic sheath cable in a wet location. Just kind of keeping that in mind. Now, SE cable would allow that, but an NM cable would not. So just kind of keep those things in mind. You got to remember this is for the interior wiring portion, not the exterior wiring portion. Interior, okay? Now, they might come to the exterior wall and hit a junction box and then change over, or that disconnect might be right on the outside wall and you're changing over to a different wiring method. That's fine. But just keep that in mind. This is for the interior portion only. And it also is reminding you that the wiring to an underwater luminaire shall comply with 680.23 or 680.33 as well. Okay, so this one here is under Part 2. This one happens to be dealing with, and 680.33 is actually falling under Part 3. But so it's making a direct reference back to that. Okay. All right, let's go on. And now let's talk about the receptacle locations. Again, we're indoor installation. That's what we're still inside. Okay, we haven't moved outside yet, I believe. Have we? Yes, we have. All right, we're done with that one. 42. We're done with those outdoor stuff. Now we're indoor. Hot dog. All right, so a lot of people like their spa and hot tub indoors. I had a house, my first house, I couldn't do that. My second house, I could have had it indoors. I had a large area to put it indoors, but I never did that. I just had an outdoor one. All right, so we're dealing with the receptacles indoors, luminaires, wall switches, bonding, methods of bonding, or these are the methods to achieve the bonding here. This tells you what parts have to be bonded. This tells you how you can do it. This tells you what equipment has to be grounded, and this right here tells you about any underwater equipment, audio equipment. All right. Now, indoor installations, 680.43. First thing that we want to understand about indoor installations, that it also says that it shall comply with the provisions of Part 1 and Part 2. All right. Then it goes on to say, except as modified by this section, which is Part 4, and shall be connected by the wiring methods of Chapter 3. Okay, so this is an indoor application, so there's a lot of wiring methods in Chapter 3 that we can utilize here. Okay, we're not going to limit you. We're going to give you some ability to use a whole bunch of wiring methods that are listed in Chapter 3. Now, we do have some exceptions here, and you see here in the yellow, which is bought into 2014, we have 1, 2, and 3 exceptions where we don't have to meet everything that's here. And let's see here. Number 1 says, well, look, if I have a listed spa and hot tub packaged unit and it's rated 20 amperes or less, and it shall be permitted to be cord and plug connected to facilitate the removal or disconnection of a unit for maintenance and repairs. So in that application, I'm not required to have the maintenance disconnect that is going to be required in part 1. And so I'm allowed to have some cord and plug applications, so I'm able to have some allowances here. Exception number 2 says, well, look, that equipotential bonding requirement for the perimeter surface that you see back in 680.26b2 shall not apply when it's a listed self-contained spa or hot tub installed above a finished floor. Not in the finished floor. If it was, then this exception is not going to apply, and you got to meet the requirements up here. Okay, so that's the kind of things that we're looking for, these exceptions. We're trying to find exceptions to trying to meet the requirements are here. And of course, we added one more that said, wait a minute, I also want to remind you, look, since we're dealing with dwelling units and only dealing with dwelling units, I just told you what kind of wiring method you could run through the dwelling unit when I was dealing with the 680.42c. So it stands to reason that I'd allow you to use those specific wiring methods again. In other words, I'll let you use a cable, like a non-metallic sheath or an SE cable with a wiring method, for example, that has a enclosed outer sheath that has an equipment ground in there, that it's not insulated, like an SE cable or type NM. I'll let you use that. Okay. If you want to run one of the raceway methods, then I'm gonna want an insulated equipment ground. Okay. But if you put one that's within an outer sheathing, then I don't care. It just can be enclosed within the outer sheathing. Interesting to note, though, that we're not just talking about non-metallic sheathing and SE cable. It doesn't say a non-metallic outer sheathing. It just says an outer sheathing. So it would also apply to things like MC cables and what have you that would not have to have an insulated equipment grounding conductor. Keeping in mind that most of the MCs that we produce, the smaller sizes, are going to go on and insulate that equipment grounding conductor. But when you get into the larger sizes, we don't necessarily insulate it. It doesn't have to be. The UL 1569 doesn't require it at that point. Okay, but you do have so many applications in the code where these smaller sizes, definitely when you're dealing with some pools and spas and things like that, that says, okay, well, you know what? You're going to have a copper equipment grounding conductor, so you might as well insulate it because there's a lot of applications that are going to require it to be insulated. Okay, but if we're dealing with a dwelling unit, then we have some allowances here, so keeping that in mind. So that's all this is saying right here is, look, hey, remember all those we just talked about in the 680.42c? Go ahead and use them if you want. We don't care. Again, this is dwelling units we're dealing with. All right, indoor receptacles. Receptacles, you got to have at least one 125 volt, 15 or 20 amp receptacle. It can be on a general purpose branch circuit. It doesn't have to be anything dedicated. It needs to be located not less than 6 feet from and not more than 10 feet from the inside wall of the spa or hot tub. So we have to have that one that's within those dimensions. Okay, and that's at least one. Could I have more? Yes, and we'll cover the protection of those down here. But yes, I can have more than one, but I have to have at least one in there. The location, it says basically, look, any receptacle that's located, that shall be located at least 6 feet horizontally from the inside wall of the spa or hot tub. So I can't have any receptacle at all that is going to be less than 6 feet from the inside wall. Okay, so they got to be at least 6 feet away. Okay, we're pretty good with there. That pretty much mirrors like we talked about in part 2. We're pretty good there. Now, what about the protection? The general rule here is receptacles are rated 125 volts and 30 amperes or less, which is going to cover all of these as well. Located within that 10 foot of the inside wall of that spa or hot tub, it shall be protected by ground fault circuit interrupter. So that's going to pretty much cover that space at 10 feet all around. 125 volt, which is actually a NEMA rating on the device. 30 amps or less are all going to be required to be GFCI protected. Protection for the actual receptacle that's being used to supply the spa or hot tub. That receptacle that provides power for the spa or hot tub shall be ground fault circuit interrupter protected. Okay, so we need to protect that receptacle in that application. Okay, and you're going to see something later which allows some units to have it integral into the cord. because they're more kind of a portable-ish type of thing. We'll talk about that when we get there. So the general rule here is we're going to GFCI protect any of the receptacles that are within 10 feet of this spa or hot tub, okay, that are 125 volt, 30 amps or less. Now, how do we measure these dimensions? Well, the measurement is going to be determined by that addresses this receptacle spacing, and it shall be measured by the shortest path of the supply cord of the appliance that is actually connected to the receptacle as it would follow it, without piercing through the wall, the ceiling, a doorway, a hinge, sliding door, window openings, or other effective barriers. So you don't measure it through those, you have to measure around those, okay? That aspect of it. So that's how you're going to achieve the measurement. We're not going through doors, through windows, not penetrating doorways in order to take this measurement. All right, let's talk about the luminaires, 680.43b. The installation of luminaires, lighting outlets, and ceiling suspended paddle fans when we're dealing with a indoor hot tub or spa. What about the elevation? Now, luminaires, except as covered in 680.43b2, which incidentally deals with underwater applications, so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the area that's an elevation above. We already have requirements for underwater applications that are found in 680.23 and 680.33. So we've already covered that in other parts. We're talking about the area that is within 5 feet, measured all the way around this spa or hot tub. We're talking about that. And the different allowances here in A, B, and C, we're talking about the clearances within that 5 feet and above the hot tub and spa in an indoor application. That's what we're trying to worry about right here. Okay, so let's look at it. What about if I have a lighting outlet, a luminaire, or a ceiling suspended paddle fan that it doesn't have GFCI protection on it? All right, where no GFCI protection is provided, the mounting height shall be no less than 12 feet above or within that 5 foot perimeter. Okay, and if it's got GFCI protection on that circuit, then it shall be mounted at a height that's not less than 7'6". So I can come down a little bit if I add that GFCI protection. One thing I do want to remind you that ceiling fans have a listing, and they have installation information, and it's going to give you a minimum height that you need to mount these fans to. Okay, so you do need to follow the instructions for these ceiling suspended paddle fans, and in many cases, wherever you install them, they have to be listed for that location. For example, if you did it outside application like you would in part 2. So keeping that all in mind, you got some information that you have to follow, and a lot of times it's going to give you a height that you have to maintain with this ceiling fan. So make sure you follow all of that information, and it's obviously within the purview of the inspector to ask you for that instructions for that ceiling fan if they think you mounted it too low. You might be in compliance with this if you GFCI protect it, but let's say that you installed it at 6 foot above the spa or hot tub, and he goes and looks at those instructions and it said it shall not be installed any lower than 7'3", for example. Then you're going to have a problem, because now it's not in accordance with 110.3b. It's not in accordance with those instructions that came with that ceiling fan. And incidentally, all of the instructions that come with things like that are part of their listing. So just, kind of some things to think about. Now, what if I want to install something below 7'6"? Now, what do I got to do here? Well, it says, look, luminaires meeting the requirements of items 1 or 2 and protected by ground fault circuit interrupters shall be permitted. It's not required. It shall be permitted to do so, to be installed less than 7'6" over the spa or hot tub or that 5 foot space around it. Okay, so it's kind of this all-encompassing space. You go out 5 feet, and then you're going to go up 12 feet, or you're going to go up 7'6", or now you're going to give some allowances to go below 7'6". Now, what about this? I can install recessed luminaires with a glass or plastic lens, non-metallic or electrically isolated metal trim, if suitable for use in a damp location. So that can be less than 6 feet. Okay, and I've got a surface-mounted luminaire with a glass or plastic globe, a non-metallic body, or a metallic body that is isolated from contact and suitable for use in a damp location. So these are really the only things that can go below 7'6". So I can have a a paddle fan that goes to 7.6, which is probably going to correspond really with its listing, could not be lower than that anyway. But when I want to go below that, I'm only dealing with luminaires. So again, the fan's going to stop about right here. Okay, so there you go. You've got some applications here. So let's look at how this applies. All right, so I've got no GFCI protection. Then the ceiling fan or the luminaire or lighting outlet's got to be 12 inches above. Okay, so then if I've got GFCI protection, it can be the ceiling fan or the luminaire or whatnot, and it can go as long as it's above 7'6". Now, if I've got a luminaire, then I can go below 7'6", provided I meet one or two. So it's either a recessed luminaire or it's a surface-mounted luminaire, and it has a glass or plastic globe, non-metallic, both have that. And as long as I meet the requirements here and they're both damp location rated, then I can be less than 7.6. So I can't have any fans down there. That's going to stop at 7.6. But I also have to have GFCI protection here. So we got the 12-foot clearance, 7.6, and then we got below 7.6 for some luminaires. All of which GFCI here, GFCI here. This one has no GFCI, but again, it has to be 12 feet above and out 5 feet. So here's the area. You can go out 5 feet, you go up 12 feet, go over 12 feet, go down, come back 5 feet. In this one here, I go over 5, go up 7'6", go over 5, down here 7'6". Here, it can be anywhere in this 5, up here, there, whatever in here, as long as I meet 1 or 2 down here. And these two have to be GFCI protected. Switches. It just says in 680.43c, switches shall be located at least 5 feet measured horizontally from the inside wall of the spa or hot tub. So this represents a switch. Here's the inside wall. Maintain that 5-foot separation. Let's talk about the bonding now. What parts have to be bonded together? So I like to refer to this as my little mini bonding grid. Okay, obviously we don't have the perimeter involved here if we had and we met all those requirements before. If we met all those requirements under 680. Let's see here, indoor installations, we met all the requirements of everything. We're indoors. It's a listed spa packaged unit. We're all good to go. Now we got to bond all these metal parts that happen to be around it. All right, so number one, all metal fittings attached to the spa or hot tub structure all have to be bonded together. 2, metal parts of electrical equipment associated with the spa or hot tub water circulating system, including the pumps and unless part of a listed self-contained spa or hot tub. All of the electrical equipment, again, unless it's listed with it, it's all going to be connected probably inside on the frame or whatnot. But other than that, metal parts of electrical equipment associated with it have to make sure that they're all bonded together, and when it's associated with the circulating water system, that type of thing. So they're all bonded. They all have to be bonded. So this one has to be bonded to this one all together. Metal raceways and metal pipes that are within 5 feet of the inside wall of the spa or hot tub that are not separated from the spa or hot tub by a permanent barrier have to be bonded to each other. So it has to be bonded to this, and this has to be bonded to this. This is a difficult task, so important is keep your metal raceways or your metal piping at least 5 feet away so you don't have to get involved in this one, trust me. And then you get into number 4, it says, look, all metal surfaces that are within 5 feet of the inside wall of the spa or hot tub that are not separated from this pool or spa, or the spa or hot tub area by a permanent barrier. Okay, so any of those metal surfaces that are within 5 feet have to be bonded all together here. Now, there is an exception that says, look, those small conductive surfaces not likely to become energized, such as the air and water jets and the drain fitting, these are not connected to, were not connected to metal piping. Okay, so they're probably connected to the non-metallic piping and whatnot. You got towel bars, mirror frames, and similar non-electrical equipment shall not be required to be bonded. Okay, so you have any of these small conductive surfaces that are really not likely to be energized. There's no power running to them. They're kind of isolated. and they're not really connected. These small conductive surfaces are not connected to any of the metallic piping that's being used, if any is being used. And to be honest with you, most of the piping in these spas and hot tubs are not. They're all self-contained, and it's all non-metallic anyway. So provided you have all that, there's no sense in bonding any of those aspects. So you get a little leeway there. And then finally, you got item number 5 that says, look, if you have any electrical devices or controls that are not associated with the spa or hot tub that are in that area, that are in that 5-foot area, you're going to have to bond those to the spa and hot tub system. Okay, so it's important to keep them out of that 5-foot zone. But you might have other electrical devices or controls that are really not associated with the spa or hot tub, but if they're in that 5-foot area, then they're going to have to be bonded to the spa or hot tub system. Okay. Now, we understand the items that we have to bond. Now we got to know how to do that. So here are the methods. You have 3 methods of doing this. So all the methods, all of the things that we just talked about have to be bonded together. Okay. You can use these methods. Well, they could be interconnected with threaded metal piping and fittings, so that could serve the bonding. Or it could be a metal-to-metal mounting on the common frame that serves that bonding. So all of these things could be connected to the metal frame of the fabricated spa or hot tub assembly, and that can cause that bond to bond, and then everything's done. Or you can meet the provisions of a solid copper bonding jumper, insulated, covered, or bare, not smaller than an 8. And in my hot tub, I had 4 different pump motors under there, and they were all interconnected together with an 8 gauge, and that looped around and tied them all together. Okay. Now we're dealing with the grounding. Now the grounding is, you're dealing with, it says the following equipment shall be grounded. Okay, so we have a grounding component, which is typically going to be our equipment grounding conductor that's going to be run to this specific equipment that is associated with the hot tub or the spa. So all electrical equipment located, so if any electrical equipment that is located within 5 feet of the inside wall of that spa or hot tub, it's going to have equipment grounding involved in it. Okay. All electrical equipment associated with the circulating system of the spa or hot tub, the pumps, for example, all are going to have a equipment grounding component. All right, so all of those motors, all of those pumps, any other equipment that's located within 5 feet are all going to make sure that it has an equipment grounding conductor with it, and it has that grounding aspect to it. Now, 480.44, we're going to talk about protection here. Now, notice it says, except as otherwise provided in the section. So we have all of these requirements for GFCI requirements everywhere, depending on where the receptacle is, supplying power to the hot tub or spa. We have some allowances here where you don't have to have it. It might have its own GFCI, or you don't have to have GFCI protection for it. So here's 2 unique applications where the general rule is you're going to have a GFCI protection on all hot tub and spa applications. But then you have some allowances here, and let's look at it. It says, well, let's look at a listed unit. So let's say, if so marked, I have a listed self-contained unit or listed packaged equipment assembly that includes an integral ground fault circuit interrupter protection for all electrical parts within the unit or assembly. That would be the pump, the blower, the heater, the lights, the sanitizer, generators, the wiring, and so forth, shall be permitted without an additional GFCI protection. So I go and buy one of these listed units and I bring it home, and I've got a receptacle out here. Then I have the ability to plug this into the receptacle. I don't need an additional GFCI component on this. Although I'm going to remind you that you still have the requirements in here to have GFCI protection on receptacles that are within a certain distance. So we have to keep that in mind here. This is for some listed units, your application. And the one thing to remember is, remember we talked about that 10-foot distance? Well, again, a lot of these listed units come with a 15-foot cord. So you might have a receptacle that is 15 foot away, and you plug this in, and it's got its own GFCI protection built into the cord. But that receptacle is more than 10 feet away, so it generally wouldn't be required to have GFCI protection. You don't have to install one. It's already in the cord. So that's kind of what it's driving you, okay? A lot of times people will do this, and they'll install the receptacle, and it's further away than 10 feet, but it's in a way that it's maybe not GFCI protected already, maybe inside of a patio, outer covering, whatever. Let's see, I'm trying to come up with an idea. An enclosed 3-season porch, let's say, and they didn't have GFCI protection there. Or it wasn't required to have GFCI protection because it's existing and it's been there a while. Well, if it is more than 10 feet away, here it allows you to be able to use this application. All right? That's just some examples maybe when you might run into that application. But when it is a listed unit and it does have that integrated GFCI protection, it doesn't necessarily require you to install another one. But you still have to meet the requirements that are already discussed in Part 4 about the receptacle location and that specific protection that we talked about earlier. So don't get the two confused. I like to think of this listed unit application for an existing application where maybe GFCI wasn't required in the location where it's being installed, and now you're installing one in, and this has a GFCI built into the actual cord assembly. Just remember that the general rule is you're going to have GFCI protection on all receptacles that are going to supply power to a spa or hot tub unit. Okay, so this gives you some allowances here. B says other units other than listed units. We got other types of units. This is a field assembled spa and hot tub for a 3-phase application, or one that is rated over 250 volts, or with a heater load that is more than 50 amps. And again, these are usually commercial spas and hot tubs, and they can get rather large current going to these things. But they shall not require the supply to be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter. Okay, so again, this is more than 50 amps. Okay, this is over 250 volts. Okay, this is a 3-phase application, is where you're able to not require ground fault circuit interrupters. Any other time you're going to have ground fault circuit interrupters on your spas and hot tubs. This gives you some allowances. This I like to think of, I can tell you one example where I know somebody that bought a hot tub, and they had a long cord on it, and they installed it, they ran the cord, and they plugged it in, and the receptacle wasn't GFCI protected, but it was further than 10 feet away. It was existing application. In fact, I didn't even think it was required. It was an older application, older home. And I would recommend them to change it to a GFCI protection to the receptacle. But in this case, the actual was a self-contained unit, and it had the GFCI built into the cord itself. So they just plugged that in, and I think it was about 14 feet away, 13 or 14 feet away. Okay, so it gives you some allowances there in that. Okay, so again, the general rule is this. All right. All right, so that's it. Let me bring you back to me. So hopefully you got something out of Part 4. You learned about the indoor and outdoor spas and hot tubs. The general rule, GFCI protection. Let's keep it there. You do have some allowance here for protections like we just talked about, 3-phase, 250, higher than 250. You have or 50 or more than 50 amps for a heating unit. Those type of things, which is more of a commercial grade type of spa or hot tub. The general ones that we hardwire with the disconnect and whatnot, those are going to have GFCI protection. Okay, they're going to have the maintenance disconnect that's going to disconnect both the 240 volt 2 lines. Those applications, we talked about the luminaires when you're dealing with part 4, especially with the outdoor. You're going to follow the general lighting requirements for these luminaires and lighting. In Part 2. Part 3 is going to give you some lighting requirements, clearances when you're dealing with an indoor application, which is going to be unique to it. And we understand the nuances about installing one of these spas or hot tubs inside of a building for a dwelling unit. So we have those aspects you got to follow. So hopefully you got something out of that. If you have any questions, as always, if I didn't cover something in detail for you or kind of glossed over to the point where you're like, all right, I still got a question. I want to answer your questions. So we're just trying to keep this one under an hour. So what I need you to do is go ahead and email us at info, that's INFO, at masterthenec.com, and send me your question. I'll be more than happy to answer that question. You can go to our website at masterthenec.com, .net, or .org, and there's a message board on there. Join the message board, and you can post a question there. You can go to our Twitter account, which is at Master The NEC, or you can go to our Facebook page, which is just go to Facebook and look for Master The NEC. And get involved in those and ask your questions and watch these webinars and our podcasts and share them with your friends. And hopefully we all can learn a little more about the National Electrical Code. All right? So thanks for watching. Hopefully it gave you some more information. And stay tuned for part 5, which deals with fountains. So we're going to cover everything that has to do with permanently installed fountains. Remembering that portable fountains are covered over in 422. We're dealing with kind of the aesthetically permanent type that you don't disassemble type of fountains. And that's what comes into part 5. All right? So we'll see you that one. And thanks for watching. Until next time.